You are listening to HOA Anger. She tried to bill me for the weather. The tow driver is here, and I am not stopping him. That is what I said the second Michelle Taylor stepped onto my driveway with her clipboard and her stack of orange cones strapped together like she was about to cordon off a crime scene. She screamed back that I was in violation for not shoveling to the edge, and she was filming and issuing a fine. The tow truck idled at the curb behind her, yellow lights spinning through the falling snow, and I knew right then this was not going to be a normal Tuesday morning in Cleveland. My name is irrelevant to this story, but my job is not. I drive a FedEx-style delivery route 6 days a week, and my disabled sibling relies on my vehicle access every single day. A tow would not just cost me money, it would be a crisis. Michelle knew that. She had been the board secretary for Driftwood Crossing Ridge Association for 3 years, and she knew every resident's pressure points the way a loan shark knows credit scores. The violation was absurd. We had gotten 8 inches of snow overnight. I had cleared my driveway, my walkway, and the public sidewalk in front of my house by 6 in the morning. I left a thin strip of snow along the curb because the plow had not come through yet, and scraping down to asphalt would have just meant reshoveling compacted ice an hour later. But Michelle did not care about logic. She cared about enforcement. I do not negotiate with winter violations. That was her line. She said it twice in the 30 seconds before I grabbed my phone and started recording back. The tow driver, a bald guy in a Carhartt jacket, stood by his truck looking uncomfortable. He had the decency to wait while Michelle ranted about the HOA emergency snow policy, something that had been amended at a board meeting I never got notice for. "You cannot tow my car for a snow violation," I said. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had done this before. "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." She pulled a laminated card from her coat pocket and read off a list of violations. Failure to clear to the property line. Failure to maintain curb access. Failure to remove snow within 6 hours of cessation. The last one was physically impossible given the timeline. But she did not care. She had the cones. She had the camera. She had the tow truck. I looked past her at the corner of my property. The snow-covered fire hydrant near my corner sat under a lumpy white mound. Nobody had cleared it. Not me, not the city, not the HOA. But according to Michelle, it was my responsibility. That hydrant was going to become the center of everything. I walked away on purpose, because I wanted her to follow and say more. And she did. She trailed me across the driveway, cones rattling in her grip, phone still filming. She repeated the threat about towing. She said I was a liability during a storm. She said the board had received complaints from neighbors about my driveway being a hazard. I did not turn around. I just let her talk. Every word went into my doorbell camera lens visible on the porch post, a little black dome she never even glanced at. The tow driver finally rolled down his window. "Lady, I need authorization paperwork," he called out. Michelle froze. She turned back toward him, and I saw the flicker of doubt cross her face. She did not have the paperwork. She had assumed the threat alone would be enough to make me fold. I stepped off my porch and walked straight toward the truck. The driver met my eyes. I shook my head once. He nodded, put the truck in gear, and drove off. Michelle stood there with her phone still raised, filming nothing. "You just made this so much worse for yourself," she said. I did not respond. I went back inside, locked the door, and pulled the doorbell footage onto my laptop. 3 minutes and 40 seconds of her threatening me, following me, citing violations she could not prove, and promising enforcement actions without any paperwork. It was gold. I saved 3 copies. That night, the first notice appeared on my door. It was printed on Driftwood Crossing Ridge Association letterhead, dated that morning, and claimed I had been issued a verbal warning 2 days prior. I had not. I had not spoken to Michelle or anyone else on the board in weeks. The notice listed a $200 fine for snow removal violations and a 14-day deadline to pay or face lien proceedings. At the bottom, in small print, it referenced the Emergency Snow Protocol Amendment, which I had never received. I pulled up the HOA portal on my phone. The violation entry was there, time-stamped 8:15 that morning. But something was off. The description mentioned the fire hydrant, the curb line, and a verbal warning issued on the 15th. Today was the 17th. I checked my phone records. I had been at work all day on the 15th. I had not been home when this alleged warning happened. Someone had edited the timeline after I disputed it. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit the like button and subscribe, because this story is about to get so much worse before it gets better. I called the management company the next morning. The woman who answered sounded tired. She told me the Driftwood Crossing Board handled enforcement internally, and that she could only process payments and schedule hearings. I asked about the amendment. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said the amendment had been posted to the resident portal on December 8th. I checked. It had not. She insisted it had. I took screenshots showing the portal history. Nothing from December 8th. She said she would look into it and hung up. 2 days later, a second notice arrived. This one was not from Michelle. It was from an attorney. The letterhead said Brunson & Kay, a local firm that did HOA collections. The letter was 3 pages of bluff language designed to scare me into paying immediately. It claimed I had ignored multiple warnings, failed to comply with emergency protocols, and created a public safety hazard. It threatened a lien, a lawsuit, and reporting to credit agencies if I did not pay within 7 days. The fine had jumped to $500. I read it twice. Then I called a journalist contact I knew from a neighborhood association meeting years back. Her name was Angela. She covered local government and HOA disputes for a Cleveland alt weekly. I explained the situation. She asked if I had evidence. I told her about the doorbell footage and the edited portal entry. She told me to file a records complaint with the management company and request all meeting minutes, rule amendments, and enforcement logs for the past year. She also told me to document everything and to stop talking to Michelle directly. That same afternoon, I was added to a neighborhood group chat I did not even know existed. Someone had posted a screenshot of my house with the caption, "This guy refused to clear his driveway during the storm, and now he is fighting a fine instead of just paying it." The post had 15 comments, most of them piling on. A few people defended me. One person said they had never received the Snow Protocol Amendment either. Michelle jumped into the thread within minutes. She posted a photo of the fire hydrant still buried in snow and said I was creating a hazard for emergency responders. She tagged me by address. I left the group chat. But the damage was spreading. 2 neighbors stopped me outside the next morning and asked if I was really refusing to shovel. I explained the timeline. One of them nodded and said they had not gotten the amendment notice either. The other one walked away without saying anything. Angela called me back that evening. She had filed a public records request with the city for any HOA filings related to Driftwood Crossing. She also told me that Brunson & Kay had a reputation for sending aggressive letters on behalf of HOAs but rarely following through. She said to respond in writing, dispute the fine, and demand a hearing. She said to attach the doorbell footage and the portal screenshots. She said to stay calm and let them escalate. I drafted the response that night. I kept it short. I disputed the fine. I stated that I had not received the amendment, had cleared my property within a reasonable time frame, and had evidence contradicting the board's claims. I requested a hearing and attached 3 exhibits: the doorbell video, the portal screenshots, and my phone records showing I was not home on the 15th. I sent it certified mail to the management company and copied Brunson & Kay. 3 days later, Michelle showed up at my house again. This time, she brought company. A man in a gray coat stood beside her holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as the compliance officer for Driftwood Crossing. I had never heard of a compliance officer before. He said he was there to conduct a site inspection. I asked if I was required to let him on my property. He said no, but that refusal to cooperate would be noted in my file. I told him I was not refusing anything, but I wanted to see his credentials and a copy of the inspection protocol. He did not have either. Michelle jumped in. She said the board had authorized the inspection under the Emergency Powers Clause. I asked which clause. She did not answer. She pointed at the fire hydrant. That is still not cleared, she said. It is buried under a snowbank the city plow created, I said. The city has not cleared it. That is not my responsibility. She pulled out her phone and took a photo of the hydrant. The compliance officer scribbled something on his clipboard. They left without another word. That night, someone moved a third notice onto my door. It was taped over the previous ones, dated 2 days earlier, and claimed I had been given a final warning at the site inspection. The inspection had happened 4 hours ago. The notice could not have been dated 2 days earlier unless someone was fabricating the timeline. I peeled it off, photographed it, and added it to my evidence folder. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was set for 7 in the evening at the community center building on the edge of the neighborhood. I arrived 10 minutes early. Angela came with me. She sat in the back with a notebook. The room was set up like a small courtroom. A long table at the front for the board, folding chairs for residents, a podium for speakers. Michelle sat at the center of the table. The compliance officer sat to her right. 2 other board members I did not recognize sat to her left. Michelle opened the hearing by reading a prepared statement. She described me as uncooperative, combative, and unwilling to follow community standards. She said I had ignored repeated warnings and refused site inspections. She said the fire hydrant remained uncleared and posed a danger to the neighborhood. She played a video on her phone showing the hydrant still buried. The video was timestamped that afternoon, hours before the hearing. I stood and asked to speak. Michelle told me to wait until she was finished. She continued for another 5 minutes, listing every alleged violation, every missed deadline, every refusal to comply. When she finally stopped, she looked at me and said I could present my defense. I walked to the podium. I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. I played the doorbell footage. The room went silent. Michelle's voice filled the space. We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works. The board members shifted in their seats. I paused the video. I pointed out the timestamp. I pointed out that Michelle was on my property without authorization, filming me, threatening me, and citing violations I had already addressed. I played the rest of the clip. Her voice again. You just made this so much worse for yourself. I pulled up the portal screenshots. I showed the violation entry. I showed the edit timestamp. I explained that the verbal warning listed for the 15th could not have happened because I was not home. I showed my phone records. I showed the attorney letter. I showed the third notice with the backdated timestamp. I listed every inconsistency, every fabricated detail, every manipulation of the records. Michelle interrupted. She said the video was taken out of context. She said I had been hostile. She said the board had every right to enforce the rules. I did not respond to her. I addressed the other board members. I asked if they had reviewed the evidence before scheduling the hearing. One of them, a man in his 60s, admitted he had not. I asked if they had verified the timeline. The same man said he had relied on Michelle's report. Angela stood up from the back. She identified herself as a journalist. She said she had filed a public records request and that the city had no record of Driftwood Crossing submitting the Emergency Snow Protocol Amendment as required by state HOA law. She said that any enforcement action based on an unapproved amendment was legally questionable. Michelle's face went red. She said the amendment had been posted internally and that external filing was not required. Angela said state law disagreed. The hearing fell apart. The two board members on the left started whispering to each other. The compliance officer closed his clipboard and leaned back. Michelle tried to regain control. She said the fine stood and that I had 14 days to pay or face further action. I said I would not be paying and that I would be filing a formal complaint with the management company and requesting a full audit of enforcement records for the past year. Michelle stood. She pointed at me. You think you are clever, but you are just making this harder on yourself. We have processes. We have rules. You cannot just ignore them because you do not like them. I stayed calm. I said the rules required transparency, notice, and fairness. I said the board had violated all three. I said I had video evidence of harassment and documentary evidence of records tampering. I said if the board wanted to proceed, I would be happy to involve an attorney and the state HOA ombudsman. The hearing ended without a resolution. Michelle said the board would reconvene and issue a decision within 10 days. I left with Angela. Outside, she told me I had done well. She also told me to expect retaliation. She was right. The next morning, my gate access card stopped working. Driftwood Crossing had a gated entrance with a card reader. My card had worked fine the day before. Now it was deactivated. I called the management company. They said the board had flagged my account due to outstanding violations. I said the violations were under dispute. They said that did not matter. They said I could request a temporary access code, but it would need board approval. I was late to work that day. I had to park outside the gate and walk half a mile through the snow to my car. My supervisor was not happy. I explained the situation. He said he understood, but that I could not keep being late. I was on probation at the new job. 3 more tardies and I would be terminated. Angela called me that afternoon. The city had responded to her records request. Driftwood Crossing had never filed the emergency snow protocol amendment with the county clerk as required by state law. That meant the amendment was not legally enforceable. Angela said she was writing a story. She said she needed a comment from Michelle. I told her to go ahead. The article ran 2 days later. It was titled, Local HOA Under Fire for Unapproved Snow Rules and Enforcement Tactics. Angela quoted me. She quoted the state statute. She included a screenshot of the doorbell footage showing Michelle's threat. The article got shared in every Cleveland neighborhood group within hours. The comments section exploded. Michelle responded with a statement. She said the article was misleading and that the board had acted within its authority. She said I was a disgruntled resident with a history of noncompliance. She said the video had been edited. It had not. Every frame was intact, time-stamped, and backed up in 3 places. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for the following week. It was announced with less than 72 hours' notice, which violated the HOA bylaws. Angela filed a complaint on my behalf. The meeting happened anyway. I was not allowed to attend. Michelle announced that the board had voted to uphold the fine and to proceed with lien filings. She also announced that I was being placed on a compliance watch list and that any future violations would result in immediate action. I received the lien notice 3 days later. It was filed with the county and attached to my property deed. The amount had grown to $800, including legal fees and administrative costs. I contacted an attorney. His name was Mark. He specialized in HOA disputes. He reviewed my evidence and said I had a strong case. He also said fighting a lien was expensive and time-consuming. He offered to send a demand letter for a flat fee. I agreed. Mark's letter arrived at the management company within 48 hours. It demanded immediate removal of the lien, a full refund of any fees paid, and a formal apology. It cited the unapproved amendment, the records tampering, and the harassment caught on video. It threatened a lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and unlawful enforcement. The management company forwarded it to the board. Michelle sent a response within hours. She said the board stood by its decision and welcomed litigation. That was when I played my trump card. I had been holding it since the day Michelle followed me across my driveway. I pulled the full doorbell footage and sent it to Mark. The video included not just the tow truck incident, but also 2 additional confrontations I had not mentioned. In one, Michelle stood outside my house at 11 at night, filming my windows and muttering about documentation. In another, she blocked my driveway with cones while I was trying to leave for work, forcing me to move them myself while she screamed that I was tampering with HOA property. Mark filed a motion with the county court requesting a temporary restraining order to stop all enforcement actions while the dispute was under review. He attached the videos, the portal screenshots, the attorney letter, the lien filing, and Angela's article. The motion was granted within a week. The board was ordered to cease all enforcement, remove the lien, and refrain from contacting me directly pending a hearing. Michelle violated the order 2 days later. She showed up at my house with the compliance officer and a bag of ice melt with a torn corner. The same bag she had been dragging to meetings as a prop to demonstrate how easy snow removal should be. She filmed my driveway and narrated her findings into her phone camera. A neighbor saw her and texted me. I pulled the doorbell footage. Clear violation. Mark filed a contempt motion. The court scheduled a hearing. Michelle showed up without an attorney. She tried to argue that the restraining order did not apply to routine inspections. The judge disagreed. He fined her personally and extended the order to include a 50-foot buffer around my property. He also ordered the board to produce all enforcement records for the past year. The records arrived 3 weeks later. They were a mess. Inconsistent timestamps, missing meeting minutes, duplicate violation entries, and dozens of unapproved amendments. Mark flagged 16 separate policy violations. He sent the findings to the management company and requested a full audit. The management company hired an outside firm to conduct the audit. The auditor spent 2 weeks reviewing the records, interviewing board members, and inspecting the HOA's financial accounts. The report was released in early March. It found that Michelle had been issuing fines without board approval, editing records after disputes were filed, and using HOA funds to pay for personal legal consultations. The report recommended immediate removal and a full refund of all fines issued under unapproved policies. The board called a special meeting. This time, it was packed. 50 residents showed up. Angela was there. Mark was there. I sat in the front row. Michelle tried to open the meeting with the defense. She was shouted down. One resident stood and read the audit findings aloud. Another resident called for a recall vote. A third resident asked why the board had allowed this to happen. The 2 board members who had been silent during my hearing resigned on the spot. The compliance officer quietly left through a side door. Michelle refused to resign. She said she had done nothing wrong. She said the audit was biased. She said I had orchestrated a smear campaign. A resident in the back row stood up. He played a recording on his phone. It was Michelle at a board meeting 2 months earlier, repeating her threat, "We can tow first and explain later." That is how enforcement works. The room erupted. Someone called for an immediate vote. The recall passed unanimously. Michelle was escorted out by 2 residents. She left the bag of ice melt with a torn corner on the table. Someone picked it up and tossed it in the trash. The remaining board members appointed an interim president and scheduled new elections for April. The interim president made a motion to rescind all fines issued under unapproved policies and to refund any fees paid. The motion passed. I received a refund check 2 weeks later. $800. The lien was removed from my property deed. The gate access was restored. Michelle's name was removed from all HOA correspondence. The new board issued a formal apology and promised to review all policies for compliance with state law. Angela wrote a follow-up article. It was titled, HOA Board Recalled After Audit Exposes Enforcement Abuse. The article included quotes from the audit report, testimony from residents, and a statement from the new board president. It went viral. Michelle deleted her social media accounts. The fire hydrant was finally cleared in late March when the city sent a crew to inspect the neighborhood's hydrants. They removed the snowbank, repainted the hydrant, and left a notice on every door reminding residents that hydrant maintenance was a city responsibility, not a homeowner obligation. I kept the notice. I framed it. The new board scheduled a town hall in April to discuss rule changes. I attended. So did Angela. The interim president opened by acknowledging the failures of the previous board. He said the new board would operate with transparency, proper notice, and respect for residents. He said all policies would be reviewed and submitted to the county for approval before enforcement. He said there would be no more surprise amendments, no more backdated notices, and no more harassment. A resident asked what would happen if Michelle tried to run for the board again. The interim president said the bylaws allowed any owner in good standing to run, but that the new board would recommend a rule requiring background checks and training for all candidates. Another resident asked about the compliance officer. The interim president said the position had been eliminated. The new elections happened in late April. 3 new board members were elected. None of them had ties to Michelle. The new board's first act was to pass a resolution requiring all enforcement actions to be reviewed by the management company before fines were issued. The second act was to establish a resident ombudsman position to handle disputes. I was asked to serve. I declined. I recommended Angela instead. She accepted. By May, the snow was gone. The neighborhood looked normal again. The fire hydrant sat clean and visible on the corner. I drove past it every morning on my way to work. I never got another notice. I never saw Michelle again. Someone said she moved out in June. I did not ask where. Angela published a final piece in July. It was a retrospective on HOA accountability and resident rights. She used my case as the lead example. She quoted the state ombudsman, who said that unapproved rule enforcement was one of the most common HOA violations in Ohio. She included a resource guide for residents facing similar situations. The article won a local journalism award. Mark sent me a bill for his services. It was reasonable. I paid it in full. He sent a thank you note and told me to call if I ever needed help again. I filed the note with the rest of my evidence. I kept everything in a folder labeled Winter War. I have not opened it since. The new board held a summer block party in August. I went. Angela was there. The interim president gave a speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition. He said the neighborhood was stronger because residents had stood up for fairness. He said the board's job was to serve the community, not control it. People clapped. Someone brought out a cake. It was a good day. I think about that morning a lot. The tow truck. The cones. Michelle screaming into her phone. I think about how close I came to just paying the fine and moving on. I think about how many other residents probably did exactly that. I think about the bag of ice melt with a torn corner that Michelle dragged around like evidence of something, and how it ended up in the trash at her recall meeting. I think about the doorbell camera that caught everything. The lesson is simple. Document everything. Know your rights. Do not let fear or inconvenience stop you from standing up when something is wrong. HOAs have power, but that power has limits. When those limits are crossed, the system does work, but only if you make it work. Michelle learned that the hard way. The neighborhood is quiet now. The new board sends notices on time. Policies are clear. Enforcement is fair. The fire hydrant is just a fire hydrant, and I still drive past it every morning, grateful that I did not let Michelle win. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.